So today we're going to dive into more of the theory and frameworks around the stages of change, and we're also going to have some time to go through some case scenarios and take your questions. So I want to introduce our guests. If you participated in part one, they will be familiar to you. We have Likwa Nkala, the manager at East Metro Youth Services. We have Mal Soulier, the manager of Youth Opportunity Strategy at New Beginnings in Windsor. And then our presenter and facilitator for this webinar series, my colleague Vivian from our Northern Hub, and she is our Youth Program Supports Manager there. So I'm going to turn it over to Vivian now to walk us through some of the theories and frameworks that we'll be discussing throughout today's presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Using the Stages of Change to Support Young People. And welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. This two-part webinar series was designed to help you better understand the four main constructs of the Transtheoretical model of behavior change, including the stages of change. So our hope in designing this two-part webinar series was that by the end of it, you'll be able to describe the characteristics of youth in each stage of change, which we'll be talking mostly about today. And you will also gain an understanding of which TTM principles and processes to use with each youth at each stage of change. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to use motivational interviewing to complement the Transtheoretical in your work with youth. So we're going to begin with a bit of a recap or review of what we talked about in the first part of our webinar series for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and for those of you who did join us who may need a refresher. So as we said in part one, the TTM consists of four constructs, with the stages of change being the main organizing construct of the TTM. And the stages of change mainly offers insights about when people change. It helps you as a practitioner assess the readiness to change, so you know which strategies and interventions work best for the youth at that point in time. We also talked about decisional balance, which is the second construct of the TTM. And decisional balance describes why people change. And it describes why people change in terms of both the pros and the cons of making the behavior change. So this construct is based largely on research that shows people are more likely to be satisfied with the decision if they consider the potential pros and cons of making that decision. Now, self-efficacy, which is the third construct that we spoke about in part one, refers to a person, or in this case, a youth's belief in their own ability to change and in their belief that they can actually achieve that desired goal. This construct considers whether people have the confidence they need to make and sustain change, because research tells us that the more confident someone is in their ability to change, the more likely they will be in succeeding. So the TTM really encourages us to assess and support self-efficacy in the intervention process. So today, we're going to be talking mostly about the processes of change, or how people change. And this describes how people move through the different stages. So specifically, we're going to discuss how people move through 5 experiential processes and 5 behavioral processes as they move from pre-contemplation to maintenance. Next slide, please. So the TTM suggests that individuals move through 5 stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. So for each stage of change, different interventions and strategies are most effective at moving people or youth to the next stage of change, and subsequently through the entire model to maintenance, which is the ideal stage of behavior. Now, there is a 6th stage, which you may be familiar of, and is called termination. However, youth workers and practitioners don't often work with people in the termination stage, so we're going to focus on the first 5 for the purposes of this webinar. So people in the pre-contemplation stage, or youth, don't intend to take action in the foreseeable future, and this is usually defined as the next 6 months. So youth in this stage are not ready to make a change. This could be because they are uninformed or underinformed about the consequences of their behavior, or it could be that they've tried several times to change unsuccessfully, so they no longer have that confidence in themselves, or they're feeling demoralized about the ability to change. So pre-contemplators or youth are often characterized as unmotivated or resistant to change. But the reality is that traditional programs or interventions were not designed for youth that are not ready to change, which is what makes the TTM unique, because it has something for everybody. even those youth who aren't ready to take action. So in the contemplation stage, youth are generally starting to think about changing in the next 6 months. They're more aware of the pros of changing, but they're also acutely aware of the cons. So youth can stay in this stage for a very long time as they weigh the costs and benefits of making that change. Youth in this stage are often characterized as ambivalent. Again, traditional action-oriented programs are not effective for youth in this stage because they're not ready to act immediately. They're just starting to think about it. But in the preparation stage, the youth intend to and have decided to make a change in the immediate future. And this is usually defined as in the next month. So typically they've already started to take some significant steps towards making the change. And these are your ideal program participants. They're ready to take action and they're excited and energized about the possibility of change. In the action stage, youth are already taking those steps needed to achieve their goal, and they have been doing this for about within the past 6 months. So typically they've been working towards making that change, and they're somewhere between leaving the preparation stage to around 6 months. Now, what makes the TTM unique is that typically change has often been associated with action, but in the TTM, change doesn't necessarily mean action per se, but it means progress. So you're able to acknowledge the progress that the youth is making up until this point and build on those successes. So the last stage we're going to talk about is the maintenance stage. So youth in this stage have been maintaining the change for longer than 6 months, and they don't need to apply those change processes as frequently as they did in the action stage. So while in the maintenance stage, youth are less tempted to relapse, and they grow increasingly more confident that they can continue this change and sustain it. And this is based on self-efficacy research, which tells us that the longer someone stays in the maintenance stage, the less likely they are to relapse, so their confidence increases. And typically, as they approach the 5-year mark, they are significantly less likely to relapse into the old behavior. However, youth or people can stay in the maintenance stage for their entire life without ever reaching termination. Next slide, please. So the other two constructs we talked about in part 1 were decisional balance and self-efficacy. Again, decisional balance refers to weighing the pros and cons of making a change. So as youth progress through the stages of change, decisional balance shifts in some very critical ways. So when a youth is in the pre-contemplation stage, the pros in favor of behavior change are outweighed by the cons of change. So whatever they're doing, the behavior, although unhealthy, is working for them. In the contemplation stage, the pros and cons tend to be equally weighted, leaving that youth ambivalent. If the decisional balance can be tipped so that the pros in favor of changing outweigh the cons, then you are likely going to be able to move that youth into the preparation stage and even the action stage. So as youth enter the maintenance stage, the pros in favor of maintaining the behavior change should outweigh the cons of maintaining the change in order to decrease the risk of relapse. So the TTM, like I said earlier, it really encourages us to use self-efficacy. If you could return to the previous slide, please. It encourages us to integrate self-efficacy into our intervention process. And this is based on Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. So this construct refers to how much confidence individuals have in maintaining their desired behavior change, especially in situations that often trigger relapse. This is measured by the degree to which individuals feel tempted to return to their problem behavior in high-risk situations. So in the pre-contemplation and contemplation stages, temptation to engage in the problem behavior is far greater than their confidence to abstain. So as individuals move from preparation to action and to maintenance, self-efficacy should increase and temptation should decrease. Relapse often occurs in situations where feelings of temptation are stronger for youth than their confidence or their sense of self-efficacy. Next slide, please. So while the stages of change explain when changes occur for people emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally, the processes of change help to explain how those changes occur. So in the next few slides, you're going to learn about the processes of change. And we're going to talk specifically, like I said, how people move from each stage and how these processes help facilitate the transitions between these stages. And specifically, we're going to be talking about 5 experiential strategies and 5 behavioral strategies. So there's a lot that happens both internally and externally with youth before we start to see overt change in them. Experiential processes of change are often those changes that occur internally and involve changes in thinking and feeling, and they're not as obvious. These processes are especially important in the earlier stages of change when they're starting to think about the change and not necessarily taking those steps. Where behavioral processes of change refer to change strategies that are more external and involve changes in behavior and changes in their environment. These are more obvious and occur in the later stages. Next slide, please. So like I said, there are 5 experiential processes that I'm going to walk you through, and those are consciousness raising, dramatic relief, environmental reevaluation, self-reevaluation, and social liberation. Next slide, please. So consciousness raising, which is often referred to as becoming informed, refers to learning new facts, ideas, and tips that support the healthy behavior change. Consciousness raising is defined as efforts made by the youth to seek new information and to gain an understanding and feedback about the problem behavior. This is when a youth becomes aware of the causes, consequences, and cures for that particular problem behavior. In this stage, as a youth worker, you should focus on raising the youth's awareness and asking questions about their behavior. Youth workers should present information to the youth that helps them become informed about the potential consequences for continuing that behavior long term. I think that this is something, or I'm quite certain that this is something that you've all done in your work with youth quite naturally. You may not have labeled this as consciousness raising, but I think that educating and raising awareness is an integral part of our practice and probably something that you've done quite often in your work with youth. Next slide, please. So dramatic relief, which is sometimes referred to as increased emotional awareness, speaks to the emotional arousal that youth may experience or express in regards to the behavior that they're experiencing. This could be fear and anxiety that go along with the old behavior, and positive emotions such as hope and inspiration that may go along with the new behavior. So there's certain techniques that you can do or use, such as psychodrama or role-playing or journaling, that can provide youth with the opportunity to move emotionally in relation to the behavior and to acknowledge their problems and losses and to identify possible solutions. Next slide, please. So environmental reevaluation, also known as considering others, means realizing the negative impact of one's behavior and the positive impact of change on others. This process asks the youth to think about the impact of their behavior on their environment and other people in their lives. It encourages youth to think about how the presence or absence of their behavior affects their social environment. It can also include the awareness that one can serve as a positive or negative role model for others. So things like empathy training and documentaries and family interventions could lead to such reassessments. Questions that you can ask youth to support their environmental reappraisal could include things like, can you list 2 people who would be affected if you changed your personal behavior? Who would benefit and how would they benefit? So when I gave this workshop last month, this generated a lot of discussion with the participants. People expressed some concern that maybe in doing this and in asking these questions, it may feel like we were, or may feel to the youth that we were shaming them for the behavior or trying to evoke some type of guilt because of their behavior. And it was very interesting And so I think it's really important when we ask these questions that we do it from a strengths-based approach, and we focus on the positives of changing. And we do it in a way that doesn't seem punitive to that particular youth. And I think in asking these questions, there's a real opportunity to talk to youth about those things that they can control in their lives, like their own emotions and their own feelings and their own values and beliefs, and how they can't control how other people respond to their behavior or react to their behavior, but how sometimes how we act or behave influences the people around us, and how can making some positive behavior change make a difference or influence the people in our social environment. Next slide, please. So self-reevaluation, which means considering your self-image, really just means realizing that the behavior change is an important part of one's identity. So it encourages the youth to think about their identity with and without the behavior, and to start thinking about themselves in a different way. Healthy role models and imagery are techniques that can move youth through this process. And there are certain questions you can ask youth to support their self-reappraisal, such as, what words come to mind when you think about how you feel about yourself if you change your personal behavior? Or how would your self-image change with this change? Next slide, please. So social liberation, which is the last of the experiential process, is known as notice the public effect or effort. And this really means identifying those social and community norms that are changing that would support the youth's healthy behavior change. So social liberation requires an increase in social opportunities for youth who are relatively deprived of opportunities. A question you can pose to youth that would support them in identifying environmental opportunities is, what types of changes do you notice in your community that supports the change that you want to make? And this really gets them thinking about acceptance and social belonging, and that there are other opportunities for them in the community. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into the 5 behavioral processes, and those are self-liberation, helping relationships, counter-conditioning, reinforcement management, and stimulus control. As mentioned earlier, the behavioral process of change refer to those change strategies that are more external and involve changes in the behavior and the environment. There's typically a shift or focus on behavioral changes as the youth move from preparation to action. Next slide, please. So the first of the 5 is self-liberation, or known as making a commitment to change. And this focuses on the youth's ability to give themselves permission to make the change and to take ownership of that process. It's both the belief that they can change and the commitment and recommitment to act on the belief. So some of the questions you can ask youth to make a commitment to the change are things like, have you made a promise to yourself yet that you're going to make the behavior change you mentioned? In what ways could you show that you've made a commitment? Could you tell other people what are the changes that you want to make? Have you written those promises down? Because we all know that youth are more likely to follow through with a commitment if they put it on paper. Next slide, please. So helping relationships, also known as getting support, means seeking and using social support to make and sustain change. And I'm confident that this is something that we all do as well naturally in working with youth, is identifying those social supports, those people, those facilitators that are going to help the youth be successful in their change journey. These relationships are typically or ideally those people that are caring and trusting and open and accepting unconditionally of the youth. And this can be you as a practitioner as well. So some of the questions you can ask youth to help them identify supportive people in their life can include, who would support you if you made your personal behavior change, and how would they help you? So this starts thinking about, gets them thinking about the possibilities of change, and that they're not alone, that there's people in their life that are going to help them get where they want to go. Next slide, please. So counter conditioning is really about finding substitutes for those old behaviors. And this challenges us as youth workers to help the youth identify some substitutes, possibly some harm reduction solutions, creating alternatives to avoid relapse. It encourages youth to change their response to certain stimuli using alternate behaviors. So if necessary, for example, what else can they do rather than return to the old behavior? Next slide, please. So reinforcement management, also known as use rewards, means increasing the rewards for the healthy behavior change and decreasing the rewards for old behaviors. So creating a plan of rewards and consequences can help provide motivation for changing during that contingency process. This process may include rewards and consequences, contracts and backup plans, self-affirmation, celebratory recognition from family and support, and asking questions like, what happens if you meet your goals? What happens if you fall short? And really giving youth something to work for, and acknowledging and building on those successes, and celebrating those successes and those progresses. Next slide, please. So lastly, stimulus control, which is known as manage your environment, includes removing reminders or cues to engage in the old behaviors and using reminders to engage in healthy ones. So considerations should be given to what types of cues could be used to help change the behavioral process. Also, what kinds of people, places, and things they should avoid, what kinds of reminders that they can use. Again, I'm certain this is something that we do quite naturally in talking to youth, especially who fear losing friends and losing their social acceptance or sense of belonging if they change their behavior, and helping them to identify new opportunities and new connections within the community or among peer groups, where they can still get that validation and that sense of belonging that comes with a new and more positive and healthy behavior. So that being said, I'm going to hand off the next piece, which is motivational interviewing and stage master processes, to my guests, Miles and Nicola.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. So this is Lekwangala from East Metro Youth Services, and I manage the community of practice for the Provincial Youth Outreach Worker Program. The Youth Outreach Worker Program partnered with York University in, I think it was about 2007, to evaluate the models that we were using in working with young people whom we define as young people at low to medium to high risk of any risky behaviors in identified geographical or our targeted communities. These are young people who are marginalized from services, which means they either don't know about services, they've had bad experiences when they've tried to access services, and so just are not people we generally see within our programs. We're looking at supporting the young people in various issues such as employment, housing, education and skill development, youth justice and criminal justice issues, income, healthy relationships, human trafficking, substance use, and mental health. At the time, as you may remember from the first session, stages of change and the Transtheoretical model was something that had been developed to help folks who are dealing with substance use issues like addiction. And we work with York University around adapting that to look at a variety of issues that we would see with the young people we face. So we were successful in doing that, and we rolled that out. And then in 2011, we realized that our staff needed support in helping young people with those processes of change. Because for the most part of it is linked to how funders, particularly government and foundations, look at things. If you're working with young people and the goal is to get them into employment, the issue is employment, you measure of success is, did they get a job? And with the populations we work with, that wasn't always a true indicator of all the work that had happened, and also just having a sort of a client-centered approach. There were many gains that sometimes young people made that didn't result in them having a job, and we wanted to be able to tell that story as well, while also equipping our staff with an ability to help young people achieve better outcomes. And so enters motivational interviewing, an evidence-based approach to really helping with the processes of change that are required in moving a young person along the life stages that Vivian has described. We like to look at motivational interviewing as it's more of a dance, not a wrestling match. Too many times, as a clinician, as a service provider, there is a lot of power and authority that comes with that position, particularly when dealing and working with vulnerable communities. And it can be very easy to impose our will in terms of this is what you should be doing. And when we do that at times, we can meet great resistance from a young person. And what motivational interviewing really tries to encourage us to do is really work in collaboration with the young person, put them at the center of their own sort of treatment, whether it's a treatment plan or what it is that they need to do in their journey to get from one point to the next. It really, motivational interviewing really helps you be able to understand the different points in time when you need to be employing different strategies, some of the ones that we've just heard about in terms of getting a young person to move through the various stages. And so there's some core principles of the motivational interviewing, the spirit of it, as it were, that we're going to go into if we can move on to the next slide. And so this is where we speak about the spirit. So this is at the core of what we believe motivational interviewing is. I like to, when I speak with my staff, I just like to use the acronym PACE. So PACE, PACE for partnership, autonomy or acceptance, compassion, and evocation. And this is really at the very core of what motivational interviewing is about. So we're going to try and go into the definitions of what each of those different things is. So if we can move on to the next slide, please.
And Liqua, we're just having a little bit of trouble. The sound is coming in and out a little bit. Just pay attention to that. I don't know if you had headphones that you can use, it might sort of block out any kind of feedback. Just for folks who are participating, Liqua's joining us by phone. So if the sound is coming in and out, just know that that could be a source of some of the difficulty we're having. And we are recording this webinar and we are capturing everything that he's sharing. So we just wanted to share that with you as well. Sorry, Liqua, please continue, but just be mindful of the sound is going in and out a little bit on your end.
Does it sound better now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'll continue. So if we can move on, so that's a graphic that we that really emphasizes how the four core components of motivational interviewing come together to form what we call the spirit, the MI spirit. Now, in partnership, we define this as how we collaborate with the young person, and it really involves how the service provider or the clinician and the client will work together, and really in a true partnership or collaboration. We really believe that this is core in helping the young person see themselves as an expert in themselves. It's their life, they're the subject matter expert in terms of what is happening. And if we can authentically work with them so that they realize this, we believe that they have it within themselves, the ability and the capacity and the potential for change. It's just a matter of not allowing them to be a passive person, a passenger in the vehicle of change, because they're actually in the driving seat, and we're just there to help them along with that. Now, the next part is acceptance or autonomy. And with acceptance, we like to look at it as a way in which you can show that a young person has absolute worth, they have a value. We believe that there is a bit of empathy and affirmation that needs to happen on the part of the clinician or service provider. And this is where you really help to build the skills of autonomy and really show that the young person, Like they have agency. So you're there to help guide, to suggest, but ultimately it's all about the autonomy that they have in terms of making decisions about their life. The next one is compassion. And I'll share with you something that the Dalai Lama said. Compassion is the wish to see others free from suffering. Anyone who willingly enters into the pain of a stranger is truly a remarkable person. And so this is once again about an authenticity of realizing and accepting what the young person is going through, that it is real for them. It might be situations that they could have got themselves into or not, but and it might not make sense to other people, but to them it is real. And so the compassion is about showing that you feel for them. So it's not just about understanding, but you feel for what they're going through, and you want to start from a position where they're at to help them get to the next place. I like what one of our lecturers has said to us in the past is you cannot make a person come to where you are if you haven't started where they are. So you need to be with them to help them move from there. You can't call to them from a distance and hope that they'll know how to get to you. And so being compassionate is a really good way of achieving that goal. The last piece, the E, is evocation. And evocation, it really involves drawing out the ideas and solutions from within the client or young person. Just recognizing that they already have considered many of the reasons to change themselves. You know, a person knows when things aren't working. A quote I like to share is a young man that I worked with was facing a lot of criminal justice issues and was constantly being suspended from school. And he said to me one time, and it was such a show, a demonstration of an ability to be very self-reflective. He said, I think everybody in life would like to go through the good door. There's a good door that allows you to experience life in a very different way than what I've been experiencing. But I don't have the key to the good door. All I have is the key to the bad door. And I'd really like what it takes to be able to walk through the good door. And so for me, what this says, it really speaks to why evocation is important, because you need to be able to understand that within the young person, within the client, many of the reasons why they want to change exist. They know they want something better. They want better outcomes for their life. It's just about helping them gain the confidence and the skill sets to be and strategies to be able to do those pieces. And then I think we go on to the next one, which are the core skills. And once again, another really nice acronym that we have, which is the OARS. So the OARS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective statements, and summarizations. Miles?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just putting my headphones in. Just give me 1 second, okay? So we want to, you want me to run through these questions now, right?
Absolutely, go right ahead, Miles.
All right, so we want to talk about using reframing questions as through the motivational interviewing tools, and then how that can kind of look at stages of change as well. So instead of asking, is drug use something you want help for? You can use it as, tell me what are some negative things that have occurred because of your drug use. Similarly with, are you happy with the way things are? You can have that as an open-ended question so that you can elicit a little bit more of a response. So tell me about the things that are going well for you. So, you know, instead of yes or no questions, we're using them a little bit more open-ended to elicit a little bit more of a response to be able to build some of that relationship. You can go next slide. Don't you think school would be easier if you could figure out how to get along with your teachers? Would be reframed with, can you tell me about a teacher you've had a good relationship with? Again, you're starting to build on a little bit more of that relationship, eliciting more of a response to be able to start to build off of that. So now you can start to bring in more questions based on what their answer is. So instead of a simple answer of, don't you think school would be easier if you could figure out how to get along with your teachers? Well, yes. It's a little bit more of, now, can you tell me about a teacher you've had a good relationship with? And then you can start to model some of that behavior back to them and start to understand how that relationship with that teacher may impact their life and how they can start to build on those types of things moving forward. Don't you want to get off probation sooner would be reframed with, how will things be different when you are off of probation? Again, building more of that resiliency in and kind of asking some of those questions that are going to elicit a longer response will give you more info to start to build off of using those motivational interviewing techniques. Katie, were you presenting these?
Yeah. What I'll do is I will. We have some case scenarios. So we, our guests have provided scenarios based on the 5 stages that we prefaced earlier on in the presentation. And so what we'll do is we'll sort of read the scenario. Everyone can see it in front of them as well. And then I'll invite our guests to sort of share some of the stage match strategies and interventions that they might apply. So the first case scenario is connected to that first stage, which is pre-contemplation. Jason is 16 years old and has been drinking since the age of 13. His parents are concerned about his escalating drinking behavior, but Jason doesn't feel he has a problem. Jason agreed to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with his parents after he took their car while drinking and got into an accident. Jason says he doesn't need a program to help him quit drinking and that he only drinks when people stress him out. He is not interested in quitting. A condition of his probation is that he sees a counselor regularly. So I'm going to ask Vivian, Miles, and Liqua. Liqua is joining us, as I mentioned, by phone, so we won't be able to see him on the webcam, but we're going to turn it to our guests to find out what sort of strategies and interventions we might apply to this case.
Liqua's still muted there.
Miles, do you have maybe do you have any thoughts on strategies and interventions for this case for Jason?
Again, I just reflecting back from our first presentation. I know pre-contemplation is always the tricky one, especially with trying to explain that to new staff that might be going through this training. Only because there's really not a lot of motivation. In this case scenario, the second last line is he's not interested in quitting. And a condition of his probation is that he sees a counselor regularly. So, starting to build out some of those, again, those kind of questions to start to tease out maybe some of those themes that might be able to kind of elicit some of that change might be helpful in this. So a question of, do you want to stop drinking? Well, the answer is, or drinking rather, the answer is no. Whereas now you can start to say, what are some of the positive things in your life that you see when you aren't drinking. So maybe that particular student is good at a sport, so you can start to build on some of those themes.
Another thing that I would consider doing is consciousness raising, as Vivian defined earlier. So one of the things I noticed from this scenario is that at 16, Jason had started to drive. And I remember being 16. I wasn't allowed to drive at 16, but I really, really wanted to. So clearly this is something I think that's important to him. But we all know that drinking and driving don't mix. Not only do they not mix, just generally, morally, legally as well. And so if he starts getting charges related to drinking at an early age, it will really severely limit his ability to be able to drive in the future. So trying to go to a place of something which is seemingly really important and getting them to view the situation from a different side, different lens. So if he wants to be able to continue to have access to the car and drive, drinking is not something that's going to work for him. And if he's already been getting into trouble, then maybe going into a program is going to show that he's working on it and he's going to learn different coping strategies and ultimately be able to get back behind the driver's seat.
Yeah. Vivian?
Yeah, just to add to that, the pre-contemplation stage is a little challenging, but if we think back about the processes and principles of the TTM, the key principle here is that decisional balance, right? And helping to bring to the forefront of Jason's mind the pros and cons, like was said around continuing the drinking and driving behavior and what that would mean, and trying to tip that decisional balance scale and to move them towards contemplation, and to educate and also use social liberation, like what's happening in the community around drinking and driving campaigns, and making them aware around the movement that this is dangerous, it's not okay, and just continuing to reiterate that during the sessions, but being in a non-confrontational way, and making sure to avoid lectures so you don't cause them to get defensive or resistant, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll move on to the next scenario for the contemplation stage. So Carmine is 15 years old and has failed 11th grade. She is frustrated with school and skips class often. She struggles with her schoolwork and says that school gives her lots of anxiety. She feels that her teachers don't care and that they are out to get her. She does have dreams of going to college, but she worries that it will never happen now because of her marks. Carmine wants to know what her options are so she can spend the summer thinking about whether she should try again in September. And again, to our guests, we're looking for stage match strategies and interventions that they might apply in working with this young person. So maybe we'll start again with Miles.
Again, this is probably a little bit of an easier situation now, only because Carmine is actually expressing, she wants to explore what those options are. So I think that now certainly listening reflectively is a positive thing, and really starting to explore maybe what that college dream might be a little bit more, and starting to tease that out a little bit, and then starting to build that path now for her in terms of what that would look like going back to school in September. Again, giving all those open-ended questions, the affirmations and the reflections. So it's really good that she's reaching out at this point. It's good that she understands that the failure in grade 11 would jeopardize, going to college, that sort of thing, is a positive thing, and starting to build out some of those teasing questions.
Maybe Liqua, we'll go over to you. What do you have to say about Carmine in this particular scenario? Or maybe Vivian? We'll go to Vivian.
Hi. So I think there's a real opportunity here to use that self-reevaluation that we talked about, because Carmine expresses that she does dream about going to college one day, and building on that, and talking about, how does she see herself, and if she continues the behavior, what does that mean in terms of her self-identity? And if she changes the behavior, what does that look like for her down the road? And what types of emotions or anxieties or fears does she have attached to that? So using the dramatic relief and giving her opportunities to talk about, maybe there's some fears around not being successful if she tries, and really using that as a building block to get her thinking about how life could be different if she does start to make some changes.
Liqua, are you there? Do you have anything to add for this particular scenario?
Yes, I was saying I agree with. Sorry, I was speaking. I think I was on mute by accident, and so I was speaking to myself. I agree with Miles and Vivian on that one. And the self reevaluation, just getting her to see herself in a different way and in a successful way. For me, the affirmations, like in terms of using the oars, the affirmations become really important. And I think I didn't really define the affirmations earlier when I spoke. It's just affirmations have been associated with really being able to increase clients' change talkability and their commitment to what they can do. So I would really use you statements. If you're familiar with conflict resolution, we always talk about I statements, but here I would use a lot of you statements and just recognize what it is that Carmen has been able to accomplish. Number one, the fact that she's seeking help. So for me, it's like, you are really brave. You are really smart to want to come and get the support. You want to go to college. Clearly that is something that's very aspirational. It's good. And so you're looking for different ways in which you can make that happen. So really using those you statements that help to build the person up and acknowledge that the fact that, like, she's actually in her own way. It's contemplation, but part of contemplation is that some little steps are being taken towards change, which is the reason why she's willing to speak with a counselor or service provider.
Wonderful, thank you. Moving on to our third case for the preparation stage. Cheryl. Cheryl is 16 years old and has been charged with 2 counts of theft. She is in 10th grade and is an excellent student, but she often skips class. Her mother is ill, and she often stays home from school to take care of her. Cheryl says she started stealing because her mother can't afford to buy her things, but now she worries that she can't stop. She often finds herself stealing things she doesn't even want. Cheryl is not proud of this behavior and is prepared to make changes. She has asked to see a counselor and intends to return the things she stole. So again, looking at stage match strategies and interventions, and maybe this time, maybe we'll start with Vivian.
So I think that there, is a real opportunity here, because Cheryl has expressed that she wants to make a change. So again, she's your ideal participant because she's ready to start taking action, and she said she's intending to return the things she stole, and she wants to see a counselor. So I think we need to really encourage and empower her to follow through with those things, and start to develop and talk to her about an action plan. What does that look like? And identify those helping relationships that we talked about as one of the key processes of change. Who in your life can support you if your mom isn't in a position to, because she's not well? Who is someone else that can support you in starting to take these different steps? And if you have, again, going back to the processes, counter conditioning, if you have these urges, what is something else that you can do that's more positive instead of stealing? And what types of places or people could you avoid to prevent you from engaging in the behavior that you're trying to change? And I think, in having these discussions with her, really offering a lot of that positive recognition and support and praise as she's going through that.
Great, Miles.
Yep. So I think looking at self-reevaluation certainly does play into this as well. So how can she reevaluate that kind of piece of it? And then I think kind of hooking up with the appropriate resources. So first seeing that, her mother is ill and needs supports, how can we help that young person actually get those supports? Similarly with income support, if she's stealing because she doesn't have the income that she needs, what resources are available in our community to be able to fill that void, and that may eliminate this problem altogether. I think that these case examples are very well written. They're perfect actually for each stage. It's not often that we have an exact example like this come up. There's a lot of work that goes into coming up to this scenario. So building on the work that has been done, and then helping her. If she says that she wants to return the things that she stole, how can we help her with that? With kind of navigating those systems and that sort of thing. And then just being able to reassure her and trying to give her those options. I think in motivational interviewing, it says a lot, it speaks about how you're able to share that information, but you don't want to be seen as coming across as the person telling them what to do. It's kind of them opening up and trying to realize that. So being the person that would have that information and being able to share it and making sure that she understands what resources are available out there and how can we help her access those.
Great, thank you. Liqua? It looks like we may have lost him there for a second, so we're gonna give him a chance. Oh, there he is. There you are.
Oh, I'm not sure what's happening. Sorry about that. I was saying I agree with Miles and Vivian. I would also employ reflective listening from our ORs in terms of, I mean, reflections have the effect of encouraging the young person to elaborate more on what's happening, to amplify or confirm the different pieces that we think we understand about the situation. And when you're doing the reflective listening, it really helps to keep the momentum moving forward, because Cheryl is like she's coming forward because there are things happening and she wants to make that change. And sometimes when a person gets to hear themselves speak out loud, it's a really great motivator and confidence booster. And to Miles's point, your job as the therapist, clinician, youth worker is just to be listening, being mindful of your body language and tone, so that you can probe nicely, just to get Cheryl to speak more about what's happening. But I'd also use some of the self-liberation tactics as well, in terms of helping Cheryl understand that she has a right to be happy and successful. You know, her mother is ill and there's things happening at home. And that doesn't have to be her life and her burden. You know, one of the young people said to me just the other day actually, that as a young person, too many times they're made to make grown-up decisions, but they're a young person. They don't have all the skill sets to be making grown-up decisions. That's why they make so many mistakes that lead them into trouble in their future. And so it's about really helping Cheryl assert that right to be happy as a 16-year-old and not having to be the caregiver at home. And so what are some of the strategies and supports that are needed to make that happen, and have it all come out in the conversation. Once again, helping Cheryl to build her own agency and autonomy. She already wants to give things back. That's great. And maybe part of the giving things back is also being able to access the right supports to help with mom at home. So Cheryl can go about being a 16-year-old who's able to be excellent in school and not have to skip classes.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, we're having some trouble there. Like, well, we're gonna go to the next case and we'll go to you first this time, okay? So the next case is aligned with the action stage. So Michael is 18 years old and was charged with his second DUI 3 months ago. He was hurt in this last accident and he has required intensive physiotherapy for his injuries. Michael started attending AA meetings 2 months ago and hasn't had anything to drink since the accident. He expressed to his doctor that he is in a lot of pain and is tempted to start drinking again. Michael's father struggles with alcoholism, so there is always alcohol around the house. Michael has come to you for support. So as I said, like, well, maybe we'll start with you this time. Stage match strategies, interventions, what do you think?
So for me, reinforcement management, we have to figure out a way to be rewarding Michael for the good behavior, because there has been good behavior. So in the 2 months, he hasn't had a drink. He's been doing what he's supposed to do in terms of the meetings. So it's really important to put something good, introduce some good activities which are a reward for what he has been doing, and hopefully limit the things that are putting him at risk of wanting to drink again, because clearly this is something that's still going on in the home. Another thing would be also to consider getting some support for his father. The other thing is also recognizing that there's things that Michael is doing that could be beneficial. So Michael could be a part of the intervention for the dad or not. Well, once again, we want to be careful about putting Michael in a position where they're becoming the caregiver to their parent. But there is something that can be said for Michael feeling like he could be a support to his dad in terms of modeling the good behavior. So I think being able to reward good behavior is very important. There's also something we call the counter conditioning, where you're using low level exposure to something that normally creates a negative reaction in order to generate a positive response. So Michael being around people who drink is probably one of the things that has made him drink. just like his dad is in the house. But maybe getting Michael to be a peer mentor to other young people, so not to adults, but to young people like him who are not at the stage where he's at, where they're still actively drinking. Have him have a leadership role around maybe speaking, running workshops. You could give or just maybe just a testimonial, an opportunity to tell his story to young people to help steer them in a different way. That could also maybe in some ways help build his confidence and keep him from drinking.
Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful to hear your perspectives as practitioners. And before we move on, I want to give obviously Miles and Vivian a chance to respond to this case. But someone just someone just submitted that they really appreciate the sentiment around encouraging young people that this life doesn't have to be theirs. And the question in response to that is, how do you balance that conversation with the acknowledgement of the systemic forces in their lives that may be at times unchangeable? So I want to give you a chance to respond to that in direct response to what you had shared about this case, and then we'll open it up to Miles and then Vivian.
It's a very good question, and it's something that folks like Miles and I struggle with the Youth Outreach Worker program. So I'll tell you what I say to the staff that I supervise. We're the Youth Outreach Worker program, but if we're working only with the youth and not with the adults in their lives who are meant to be the buttresses for, like, once we're gone, because we're only in their lives for a short amount of time. So the adults in their life also need to be strengthened, especially if they're struggling with something. And so we actually do take it upon ourselves to be very deliberate and intentional with providing support to those adults, whether it's parents or other caregivers. Sometimes even providing them more support than we do to the young person, because they're the ones who will have to create those conditions for the young person to thrive. The point about the systemic issues that are seemingly unchangeable. I'll give you a quote that's not original to me. Someone said, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." And so you can only do that in each unique situation with the young people, with their parents, with the people around them. How can you get that unit, that family unit, the support that they need? And it might require bringing in multiple people in order to do that, staying coordinated around that common goal, which is how are we creating conditions for this family or for this young person, and whether it's in a foster child welfare situation, how are we creating the conditions that'll make this young person be able to thrive? It's not easy, but like those are the like that's what I would do. That's what I have to say in response. Hope that's helpful.
Miles, maybe we'll go over to you next.
Sure. So maybe just building off of Likwa's statements as well. I think at the end of the day, actually, Likwa and I were just in a training where they actually talked about, how often we, as youth workers, it's easy to kind of bash some of that system that we say we work in. So it's, if we get a young person, oh, the system really screwed you over, or whatever that might be. It's easy for us to say that, but at the end of the day, we need to take responsibility for that system. So if we're noticing something that's wrong with this system, we have a duty and a responsibility to take action against it. So very, very, very frequently, we are meeting with our funders. We're giving youth a stage to be able to talk about what some of those systemic issues are, and giving them a voice to be able to try and help affect that change. So if you look at it, like Likwa was saying with Michael in this specific situation, if we give him the option of a leadership role in this, that might reinforce that change that he's been making, keeping him in that action phase and moving him into maintenance. There are, looking at the stimulus control that Vivian was talking about earlier, how do we manage that environment, helping him, give him some of those tools, and some of those different options that we might take to be able to kind of help inform some of that moving forward. So I will say that we do a very good job in trying to effectively help youth navigate some of that system. But then when we do see an issue with it, we are always trying to give them opportunities to be able to address what that issue is and that systemic barrier. Easier said than done, absolutely. But we're constantly sending youth. We've sent youth to Toronto to talk with ministers. We've spoken with our funders. We've brought youth in to give youth testimonials, like Lick was saying, actually, about some of the work that we've been doing to be able to try and say, like, these are the issues that we're constantly seeing, and this is how we kind of support them. So a little off course there with Michael, but it's certainly what Lick was speaking about with trying to give him a platform. And then I would certainly look at the stimulus control as well. So maybe it's looking at trying to get him to move out on his own. If that's an option that he wants to explore, we would certainly help him in this situation with that.
Hi. Yes, so that's an excellent question, and one of our biggest challenges as youth workers. So I think I'll say two things. The TTM really encourages us to focus on changing the stage and acknowledging the complexities of some of the systemic barriers that the young people we work with face, and how incredibly difficult it is to change the things in their environment. However, if we shift the conversation to the changes that they can make, the things that they can have some control over in their life, like moving from pre-contemplation to contemplation, then we can build on those successes and build on their confidence to see themselves in a different way, or to have a different life. And so if we can move them just a little bit in their thinking, then we can acknowledge and celebrate that success and that change that they facilitated, and build on that. Again, I'll go back to something I said earlier around control. With my background being in child welfare and working with youth in foster care, a lot of the young people we work with feel this loss of control, this lack of control in their life, which is how these behaviors often evolve, because they're trying to take some action in their life that they can control. And so having those conversations around what are the things that they can do now to make a better life for themselves, while still trying to make changes in their environment that may be a little bit more challenging, but what are the things that they can start working on today, and give them that sense of autonomy over their lives, and supporting them in doing that.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. We're going to move into our last case scenario, attached to someone who's in the maintenance stage. So Patsy is 19 years old and had been using drugs for 3 years before she entered treatment and successfully completed a residential program 6 months ago. Since finishing her treatment, Patsy has been involved in a recovery group, which she attends every week at least once. Patsy is happy she attended treatment, but she worries about her ability to stay drug-free. When she's having a bad day or fighting with her family, she also worries about losing her friends who still actively use drugs. She says she feels lonely and is questioning her ability to succeed. So looking at stage MAT strategies and interventions, maybe this time maybe we'll start with Vivian.
So I think first and foremost, we want to celebrate Patsy for all of her successes and continue to acknowledge those as she moves through her change journey. And I think one of our roles is to continue to revisit that relapse prevention plan with her, to ensure that it's still working, because this stage is very dynamic and they experience lots of changes in their life. Finding opportunities, again, to build on that success is especially important, and revisiting those new coping skills that she has developed. So when it comes to a situation or scenario where she is having a bad day, what are those positive coping strategies that she can use, and talking about whether those are still working for her. Having those conversations if she does happen to relapse around this is a learning opportunity, it's not a failure, and how do we move back quickly to the new behavior. Yeah.
So, yep, we're getting better with this unmuted and muted thing now. Certainly to Vivian's point, absolutely. So looking at the counter conditioning, I would be kind of looking at the statements of she's feeling lonely and questioning her ability to succeed. So certainly, you know, when you go through these types of programs, a lot of times you do have to, you know, you may lose friends because they're still involved with that behavior, and you just can't put yourself in that situation. So what kind of social situations can we expose her to? What alternative, you know, resources are available in the community? Are there life skills groups that she can start to kind of look at? A friend group that she may be able to start different social circles and that sort of thing would certainly be helpful for Patsy in this situation. And then in terms of her ability to succeed, looking at what that path is. So helping her explore what the future might hold for herself. Is it, you know, some sort of future school? Is it employment? What that might look like for her. And then helping her trying to look at that. But certainly looking at counter conditioning and using substitutes. You know, what healthy behaviors can we help her support to be able to try and mitigate some of those negative behaviors that she's clearly had a lot of success in moving forward from.
Great. Like what?
I'm here.
No, there you are. Great.
So ditto to Vivian and Miles. For sure, the reinforcement management and the counter conditioning, finding ways to reward her for everything that has been going really well. Because when I look at the scenario, there's way more pros than there are cons. She has not relapsed. She's worried that it might happen if she's having a bad day or fighting with her family. But in terms of having completed 6 months of a treatment program and everything, things are going well. To Miles's point, examining how we can help her with those social situations, particularly with her friends. Someone once said to me, friends are the family you choose for yourself. And so how can we create new conditions for her and her friends to be socializing in that are drug-free, that are alcohol-free, but are still fun, that her friends would want to engage with her? Or how can we put her in situations where she's making new friends, where she can choose new family? As before with some of the other scenarios, if there's close proximity between her and her biological family, and that has the ability to potentially stress her out, what supports are we making available for them as well while all of this is happening?
Great, thank you so much. We have a few questions that we wanted to end with to leave you all to reflect. We still do have time to take your questions for our expert panelists. So if you have a question, feel free to submit it. If you have a scenario that touches on aspect of a young person's experience that wasn't reflected in the scenarios we already discussed, please feel free to share those as well. But in thinking about what you've learned about the Transtheoretical model and the stages of change, thinking about how you can use the stage approach to facilitate the stages of change in your work, the pros and cons of using a stage approach, are there ways to shrink the cons, some situations where using a stage approach could be difficult, and what you can do in those situations to stay on track. And I guess before we move on to the questions from our audience members, I wonder if our panelists have any last comments they want to share on what we've discussed or on any of the reflective questions. I just want to make some space if anyone wants to add anything or say anything before we move on to questions from our audience. If not, we can go right on into questions. We have a few from folks who are participating in our webinar today. One question is, how do we support youth who are having a hard time identifying their strengths or genuinely believe that they do not have any strengths? What are some strategies in supporting young people really having a hard time identifying their strengths? Who would like to take on or start with this question?
Can you read the question again? What are some strategies for, sorry, I missed the last part.
No problem, no problem. A strategies around supporting a young person who is having a really hard time identifying their strengths. They may not see themselves as having any strengths.
Mm. I think for me, I'll use the oars here. Working with the open-ended questions and the reflective statements, getting them to talk more about themselves and the things that are going on in their life, getting them to talk about the times when they feel good, what is happening when they're feeling good, what is it that they're doing. So when do you feel good? What is happening when you're feeling good? What is it that you're doing when you're feeling good? Just to sort of try and get to the core of that piece, and then maybe being able, out of that, being able to elicit enough information to make a proper referral or bring somebody else on. I think one of the pieces that is really important to, at least for me to say, is for me is that sometimes you may not be the one who is needed to help the young person move from one stage to the next. So the more information you have, the better you'll be able to make a decision whether you're the person with the skill set to continue, or if it's about introducing somebody else who will be able to do some of those deeper pieces.
Vivian or Miles, do you have anything you wanted to add to that? Great, Miles.
I think we spoke about this a lot actually in the first webinars. Coming from a certainly a strengths-based approach requires you to identify some of those strengths, and it can be hard. I think if the people listening could think about themselves and reflect on themselves for a second and just think, like, if someone were to ask you what are your strengths, you'd probably freeze and start to think, but they wouldn't immediately come to the forethought. So certainly, to Liqua's point, trying to build on that relationship. So that you can start to build on those open-ended questions and try and tease out some of that thing is certainly a skill that a lot of times you can teach, but it does take a lot of practice to be able to get there. So I would say looking at your motivational interviewing techniques certainly has helped me and my staff here to try and tease out what some of those strengths are, and then start to build on some of those strengths as well. Is certainly it's a goal, but it can be very difficult when you just pose the question of so what do you think you're good at, or what are your strengths? A youth won't respond positively to that, but if you can start to give them opportunities and things like that, that's certainly a positive thing here. So for example, we have a first robotics team here. I'm actually doing some scheduling for it right now, so it's on the top of my brain. But we expose youth to a lot of different things in that first robotics team. And it's amazing what they can kind of say to see, like, I was never good at this. I never thought I could do this, but because I had this experience, I'm now in, like, we have a youth who you would never expect them. A year ago, they would have never thought that working in with materials would have been a strength of theirs. They're now in wood shop and tech class at school, and they're actually pursuing an education behind that now. So, giving people experiences, hands-on experiences, does help to try and tease out what some of those strengths might be.
And just to one point, just to add to all that, we use here at Laurentian, we encourage a lot of self-awareness activities with young people using different arts-based methods, because often the young people we work with don't yet have the skills to or express or articulate some of the things that are happening in their lives. And so I think giving them different platforms to talk about what is happening in their life and to have those conversations around, who are the important people in your life? What are some of the good things that are happening? Like going back to that open-ended question of, can you tell me of some of the good things or some of the things that you like that are happening in your life, and then building on there and helping them identify those strengths or those things that they may not consider a strength. And even maybe posing the question around, what would your best friend say about you in terms of your strengths, and maybe getting them to see how other people might perceive their strengths as well.
Vivian, one of our audience members just asked if you can provide any resources on good self-awareness activities to do with youth. If you have any that come to mind, if not, we can certainly share them after the fact, but if you do.
I do actually. Our academic director, Dr. Diana Kahalik here at Laurentian University, actually just wrote a book based on her program, the Holistic Arts-Based program, that offers all kinds of tools and activities to encourage mindfulness and self-awareness with young people who've experienced adversity in their life. And these are tools that are applicable to all kinds of populations or youth work practice. And it really encourages us to evoke those opportunities for youth to start thinking about things that are happening and how it impacts their feelings, and encourages non-judgmental ways of being, so that they aren't being overly hard on themselves for the things in their life that they can't control, or for the feelings that they're having as a result of what they're experiencing. So they're, I find they're very effective in working with young people.
Absolutely, and we can absolutely share resources with folks with the webinar recap, because we will be sharing obviously a recording of the webinar, the slides, our fact sheet around stages of change. We can share some of these great resources with folks who participated today. So thank you so much. I'm going to move on to another question that we have from an audience member. I'm just going to read the comment to frame it, and then the question. Someone shared, so often we see youth who have found their desire to change and are held back by the adults in their lives that are not ready to see that change take place within the young person. The struggle is, how can you maintain motivation for a young person who is at the preparation stage when their adult support system or parent is at the pre-contemplation stage and doesn't even recognize that there may be an issue? I wonder if anyone wants to start responding to that question, if anyone has any thoughts on how you might work with a young person in that situation. Miles, yeah.
So I think Liqua covered this a little bit before as well, around how we can't work with a youth in isolation without looking at what that family system looks like as well, and providing them with support. So I think, in any specific example would be looking at what supports the family would need to be able, and education behind what that might look like for the family as well. We can work with a young person from 9 to 5, 10 to 6, 11 to 7, whatever those hours are. But at the end of the day, they're going to spend the majority of the time of their time back at home with their family. So being able to provide, making sure everybody's on the same page is very, very important to make sure that we're actually supporting this change from all angles. So in that case scenario that you just read, it absolutely can be a struggle, but in terms of providing education and support to that family unit would be a great benefit as well. So having flexible programs that are able to do that as well, I think is probably key as well. I know some programs are limited by number of sessions and that sort of thing, might not include the family piece of it. So being able to rely on resources in your community that might be able to work with that family directly to be able to support that change would be important. So.
Any of our other panelists, Vivian or Liqua, do you have anything you want to share?
Absolutely. Absolutely what Miles said. For me, the answer was actually in the question itself, because the question said the parents were at the pre-contemplation stage. That means you've got a game plan. You would utilize what you know about moving someone from pre-contemplation to contemplation to preparation. So you would be actually helping the young person by employing stages of change or the Transtheoretical model with their parents separately, just to get them to where they need to be as well. So you wouldn't just be doing it with the young person. I use stages of change in all my dealings, professionally, personally. It's a really good way of assessing where people are and what you need to do to get people to move to a different place, including myself.
Great. I think I want to be mindful of the time. We're coming to the end of our time together this afternoon. But before we end, I just wanted to give our panelists one last opportunity. If they want to share anything, say anything, some final thoughts before we wrap up today's session. Does anyone have anything else they wanted to say before we say farewell? It seems like we covered it all. We covered a lot of ground over these last three hours, I guess, together. Yeah, sorry, Liqua, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think it has been an amazing experience, the 3 hours. I think the questions have been very well thought out, that folks have presented to us. Once again, disclaimer, the Youth Outreach Worker Program is not essentially a clinical program, but we did employ the Transtheoretical model in our delivery of how we do most of our informal counseling sessions with young people. And those sessions happen in community, not necessarily in counseling rooms. And we do have some staff who are clinical that employ it. So if some of our statements or presentations didn't meet clinical standards, that's what it is. But I hope it was helpful in some way.
If I could just second that as well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you're able to take away something that you're able to use in the work that you're doing with youth and build on your practice from what we've talked about.